Well, hey there, folks. I'm Dr. Andrew Franklin, Assistant Professor out of the Department of Psychology at Norfolk State University, and this is a presentation dealing with cultural cognition. In particular, folks, in this presentation, I'm going to explore Jonathan Haidt's moral foundational theory. It's a moral foundational theory that is very intuitionist in nature. It's a social intuitionist model, and I'll break down the six different classifications that he listed out in his moral foundational theory. Then, after talking about it, I will segue into talking about what the research shows in regard to the moral foundations that conservatives prefer versus what liberals prefer. And then finally, we'll wrap up the conversation talking about what we can do to reduce bias and polarization in America, given the landscape that we are currently in, where individuals are divided, not just in Congress, but across all types of groups, being religious groups, racial groups, etc. What can we do to make sure that we reach common ground with these individuals and that we take our defenses down and start to be more trustful of out groups, even though they may not resemble our in groups right away? We're going to talk about how to reduce bias and polarization within this lecture as well. So thank you for clicking play, and let's get wheels up with this critical content. So I'll start off this presentation by talking about moral psychology. Moral psychology is the name given to the contemporary psychological study of morals, ethics, and virtuous behavior. Morals is often referred to as what is right or wrong on an individual or personal level, while ethics pertains to established rules and procedures based on an external entity. Researchers in the field of psychology are interested in the foundations of morality and how these foundations might differ from one person to another. Jonathan Haidt endorses a social intuitionist model and argues that many of the differences that divide people politically and religiously come from these moral foundations. This social intuitionist model is kind of like a reworking of dual processing theory, and that type 1 thinking in this model is presented in the intuitionist approach. The intuitionist approach deals with individuals making decisions based on emotion and intuitive responses to situations. Type 2 thinking is termed rational cognition within this social intuitionist model, and it refers to conscious, effortful, and slow rational thinking. Haidt believes that when a particular moral decision is made, for example, one makes a decision about a behavior being wrong, we will make the decision intuitively and then justify it afterwards with rational cognition. He also believed that there are some instances where individuals use an intuitionist approach, but they do not develop a sound reason as to why they think a behavior is wrong, and this is called moral confounding. So let's delve into Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionist model a little bit more by talking about his moral foundational theory. Haidt's model consists of six moral foundations from which human beings make moral decisions and judgments. The first foundation is caring, and this allows us to be sensitive to suffering in our own groups, and then it generalizes to other groups. So I have a beautiful, intelligent, amazing 4-year-old daughter. She's pretty much incredible at everything that she does, but there are times where she doesn't use her better judgment and she jumps off of the sofa. She literally jumps off the sofa like she's a WWE superstar. And sometimes when that happens, she ends up falling, she hurts herself, and then she comes to me and she goes, "Daddy hurt," and then I tend to her needs. It would be thought that I'm tending to her needs because of this caring foundation within Jonathan Haidt's model. Now, me caring to her needs eventually generalizes to me caring to other people's needs. Approximately a year ago, I was walking on campus and I had the unfortunate experience of watching a professor suffer a seizure as she was walking to the NGE. Her body stiffened up and she just fell straight back near the clock tower in the center of campus. So, about 150 pounds to 200 pounds just straightens up and falls straight back and falls to the cement ground, and it literally freaked me out. After that happened, I sprung into action, and what impressed me the most was how NSU students sprung into action, right? They all just kind of leapt in. People got on their phones, calling campus police, calling 911, making sure paramedics were on the way. So it's thought that this sense of caring that the NSU student population shared, along with my sense of caring, stemmed from first a sense of caring that was existent with our immediate families, and then it generalized out. Fairness motivates reciprocal altruism and produces social emotions of anger, guilt, gratitude, and the like. How many of you guys have had a similar experience like me, where you've been watching a news broadcast and you've been angered about something that just does not seem fair? This could be as it relates to policies that are affecting a particular demographic in the U.S. And as you're listening to the news broadcast, it may spur a bunch of guilt. It may spur gratitude. It may spur the like. You may have guilt because you may think to yourself, man, I need to do more on the activism front, or man, I need to make sure that I pull up a petition so that it can be signed and that petition can be taken to the right lobbyists and the right political leaders in your particular capital. It may spur gratitude because you start to reflect on your own luxuries and how you enjoy those in a mundane way, while there are other people in the world who only have those luxuries every now and then. So it's thought that this sense of fairness spurs these types of emotions, especially within social situations and contexts. Loyalty deals with cooperation with one's kin group and the emotion of trust that can eventually generalize to other in groups. Feelings of loyalty, patriotism, and heroism are associated with distrust and even aggression or hate directed towards individuals in the out group. So my wife is a huge Steelers fan, and she is certainly very loyal to that particular team. And when I start talking about the Ravens, because I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, she starts giving me the side eye, right? And I start wondering if I'm going to sleep on the sofa that particular night. So it's thought that these types of feelings, and that was a trivial example, but it's thought that these types of feelings are kind of stemming from this loyalty foundation. The authority foundation evolved through living in hierarchically structured groups where dominant males and females received privileges unavailable to others. Feelings of awe and respect came out of those foundations. Now, it's not to say that we are in awe and we respect everybody that is in authority, but it's just this foundation is simply to say that we are simply evolved beyond, that smaller group structure where a lot of awe and respect was likely to take place because of this need for cooperation and us all trying to survive. And it's still present today, even though we live in enormous societies that are going to become much more complex by the year 2042. The moral foundations of liberty and oppression also involve social interactions with members of one's group and feelings that develop in response to perceptions of restraint on one's liberty. Now, these perceptions of restraint or these threats to one's liberty can come from businesses, government, employers, and so forth. Finally, sanctity deals with purity and motivates approach and avoidance behavior towards certain situations. It elicits feelings of disgust, which leads to avoidance, or pleasure, which leads to approach. So, for an example, the approach of an avoidance behavior is initially directed towards physical situations. So, situations involving corpses and rotting food, right? Because these could have detrimental health consequences, but it can also generalize to social situations as well. For example, some people unfortunately make decisions to stay away from deformed individuals and individuals who are indeed obese. Now, research shows that self identified political liberals were motivated by fairness and care and less by the remaining four moral foundations, where self identified conservatives were motivated by the six foundations equally. Specifically, political liberals are more motivated by care and fairness, more so than conservatives, and conservatives were more motivated by loyalty, authority, and sanctity than were liberals. There are individuals who disagree with the basic premise of Haidt's viewpoints. Nevertheless, it seems that political conservatives seem to value loyalty and respect more than liberals, and liberals value fairness and care more than conservatives. Liberals tend to be less accurate about the moral foundations of conservatives than conservatives are about liberals. Haidt proposes that when entering in dialogue, especially one where you might be trying to change someone's opinion, it will be necessary to understand the moral foundations from which one is operating. This is increasingly important because it may be difficult to understand how people can have different opinions or think in particular ways because their moral foundations motivate a different set of emotions and virtues than you experience. Couple this with the fact that next to occupation or profession, commitments as Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberal, gay, pro-lifers, pro-choicers, these things are very tightly linked with identity. In other words, ideology is tightly linked with identity. So opposing positions on issues are delicate conversations that must be handled respectfully and at the least acknowledge one's ideological framework as it relates to Haidt's model. With doing so, the opposing message will have a greater likelihood of being processed and understood. For example, in regard to gun laws in America, liberals will likely emphasize the care harm foundation with marked concern for guns falling into the wrong hands. Conservatives, on the other hand, will focus perhaps on liberty slash oppression moral foundations. That is, the right to defend oneself from oppressive forces of any kind with guns. Knowing what set of moral foundations is influencing someone may help both parties to find a common ground. So, at this point in the presentation, I want to talk about how we can reduce bias and polarization. But before we get there, I just want to talk about how bias and polarization is showing up in our society. The influence of individual bias and polarization based on group membership shows up when one considers the death of Trayvon Martin by the hands of George Zimmerman in 2012, the death of Freddie Gray by the hands of police officers in Baltimore, Maryland in 2015, the death of Tamir Rice by the hands of police officers in Ohio, the questioning of former President Barack Obama's citizenship and whether he is a Muslim, Congress's inability to find common ground on major issues of the day and acknowledge the valid concerns of individuals across the aisle, a mass shooting in South Carolinian Baptist Church by way of an individual trying to start a race war, the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and countless other cases. These cases highlight polarization and bias psychologically, socially, regionally, emotionally, and behaviorally. Individuals oftentimes endorse whichever view supports their connection to others with whom they have vital commitments. It seems that we all are biased by biology to prefer members of our own groups. Given that groups are necessary for survival, there are various cognitive and social psychological processes that ensure we associate with people who look like us, think like us, behave like us, and who believe like us. So, given our propensity to associate with people who look like us, think like us, behave like us, and believe like us, what can we do to reduce bias and ensure that discrimination doesn't take place without groups? Well, I'm glad you asked. I certainly don't have all of the answers, but I can tell you what the research says about trying to reduce bias and polarization. There is an abundance of research that highlights how increased contact among groups improves intergroup relations and attitudes. Intergroup contact helps to reduce intolerance, even in those individuals who are highly ideological. Evidence has been found in groups from a variety of cultures, countries, and communities. For example, prison and universities. Sometimes in university settings, there will be town hall meetings where sensitive topics will be discussed. And as it pertains to this particular class, interfaith dialogues is oftentimes a forum used to increase inclusivity, pluralism, and empathy that goes well beyond tolerance. Contact decreases threat and anxiety that other groups generate. Empathy, trust, and decreased threat and anxiety are all factors that characterize relationships toward members of the in group. Contact helps individuals see groups as more like them and members of their own groups. Intergroup contact helps to reduce prejudice, and this is especially the case with those high in the need for closure. Increasing awareness of moral identity helps to temper the effect of the binding foundations of Haidt's moral foundation theory, such as loyalty, authority, and sanctity, and its ability to cause individuals to have a negative view of outsiders. And then finally, presenting one's position on a particular issue in a way that does not threaten the other side's values may be a way to convince others of your position they would intuitively oppose. For example, if gun control laws are important to me because of my emphasis on care and concern as a liberal, then I would appeal to a conservative's ideal of being liberated by emphasizing that background checks will not impede on individuals' liberty to stave off oppression by force, but rather it will simply keep guns out of the hands of individuals who could cause a great deal of harm. In ensuring that individuals who can morally and ethically handle a gun get proper background checks, this will help ensure that guns may not have to be used in the first place to ensure liberty of all citizens from oppressive forces.